I swore I'd take this secret to my grave. For years, I let everyone believe their version of what happened. But last night, I saw the one person who knows the truth, and they smiled at me like nothing ever happened.
Welcome to Reddit Toxic Family Telltales channel. New episode every day.
Mrs. Duran slammed my chemistry test on the desk so hard it made my pen roll off the edge. There it was again, the bright red F circled not once, not twice, but 3 times. My ears burned as the entire AP Chem class turned to look at me like I just committed academic treason. She didn't just fail me quietly. Oh no, she announced to the whole room that some people just aren't cut out for advanced science. Then she suggested I drop to regular chemistry, or maybe, she said with that little smirk, try shop class. You're wasting everyone's time here, she added, tapping the paper with her red pen like a judge handing down a sentence. Face reality. You're not college material. I stared at the periodic table on the wall behind her, trying to focus on anything but the lump forming in my throat. I wanted to scream that the formulas on my paper were right. She'd marked them wrong because I hadn't shown my work exactly the way she wanted. Meanwhile, my phone sat zipped inside my backpack, still flashing a notification I'd ignored all morning. Another acquisition offer for my app. After the bell, I stayed behind to clean up the lab equipment like I always did. It was supposed to be punishment for failing, but honestly, I liked the quiet. The beakers clinked softly as I stacked them. The faint smell of ethanol lingered in the air. That's when Mr. Castillo, the janitor, came in with his cart, mop bucket squeaking. He gave me this curious look. Why are you here every day? Detention? He asked, wringing out the mop. I told him about the failed tests, about how Mrs. Duran made me clean for extra credit, and how she said I'd never amount to anything in science. He stopped mid-mop. For the first time, he really looked at me. Not the usual quick adult glance, but like he was trying to figure out who I was. His eyes flicked to my backpack, where my laptop, covered in hackathon and coding stickers, peeked out. That yours? He asked. I nodded, explaining I just liked coding on the side. Nothing serious. Apps, websites, just fun stuff. He raised an eyebrow. Show me. So I pulled it out, flipped it open, and loaded up my tutoring app, the one I'd built from scratch. I showed him how it paired students with peer tutors based on learning styles, how it handled scheduling, payments, everything. His jaw literally dropped. How many users? He asked, voice suddenly sharp, like he just switched from janitor to something else entirely. About 3,000, I said, growing by a couple hundred a week. Before I could minimize the dashboard, his eyes locked on the revenue number at the bottom. The mop handle hit the floor with a loud clack. You're making $40,000 a month? He whispered. I tried to explain server costs, payment processing fees, marketing spend, the 2 freelance devs I'd hired. But he just laughed, shaking his head like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Kid, he said, still grinning. I worked in Silicon Valley for 10 years. I know what this is. That's when the door opened, and Mrs. Duran walked in with her coffee. She froze at the sight of him hunched over my laptop. Her face twisted immediately. Unauthorized computer use, she snapped. Probably cheating again. See? This is why you don't belong in this class. Mr. Castillo stood up slowly. Ma'am, do you have any idea what your student built? She gave a snort. I don't care what games he plays on that thing. It's not a game, he said evenly. It's a fully functional edtech platform with 3,000 paying users. Generates around $500,000 in annual revenue. I've seen Stanford MBAs pitch worse ideas for millions. Her face went through a whole slideshow of emotions. Confusion, disbelief, and finally that pale, tight-lipped fear. She stared at me like she didn't recognize the kid she'd been calling a failure. That's not possible, she stammered. I didn't say a word. Just turned the screen so she could see the Stripe dashboard, the growth charts, the testimonials from students. Real numbers. Real results. Mr. Castillo folded his arms. You could scale this to millions if you wanted. Have you talked to investors yet? Mrs. Duran's face drained of every drop of color. She grabbed her coffee and practically sprinted down the hallway, heels clicking like a metronome speeding up. The moment she disappeared, Mr. Castillo pulled out his phone. I still know some people, he said, scrolling fast. Vikram's one of them, big in edtech investments. He's gonna want to see this. Then, with a grin that didn't quite hide the fire in his eyes, he added, but don't drop this class. Let her fail you if she wants. We're going to bring her hell. I watched his thumbs fly across the screen as he messaged Vikram. My hands were still shaking from everything that had just happened, but underneath the nerves, something new was building. A spark. He looked up. Vikram will probably want to do a call this week. Be ready with real numbers. That night, I sat in my room, laptop screen glowing in the dark. The acquisition email was still there. $850,000. Enough to change everything. But I couldn't stop replaying the look on Mrs. Duran's face when she realized what I'd built. Something about taking the easy payout didn't feel right anymore. I closed the email without replying. The next morning, when I walked into school, whispers followed me down the hall. People stared. Some swore they'd seen Mrs. Duran storming out of the lab yesterday looking wrecked. The rumors ranged from he threatened her to he got caught hacking the Pentagon, or something equally ridiculous. My friends cornered me at my locker, demanding answers. I just shrugged it off. Misunderstanding, I said, because seriously, how do you explain, oh yeah, I'm just making more than your parents every month from a tutoring app without sounding insane? By lunch, I'd had enough of the cafeteria chaos. I slipped into the empty chemistry lab, letting the quiet wrap around me. The soft hum of the vents, the smell of rubbing alcohol, organizing beakers had become weirdly calming. Halfway through, Mr. Castillo walked in. Vikram's free tomorrow evening, he said, leaning against a lab table. But be ready. He's gonna grill you on acquisition costs, churn rates, competitive advantages, all the fun stuff. I nodded. I'll be ready. That afternoon, I camped out in the library and built a proper pitch deck. Real slides, growth charts, RPU, retention curves. For once, this wasn't just some hobby I did between homework assignments. This was about to get real. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of Mrs. Duran's red pen anymore. That afternoon in AP Chemistry, the air in the room felt heavier than usual. Maybe it was me imagining things, but I swear Mrs. Duran went out of her way not to look at me. She scanned the room as she lectured, made deliberate eye contact with everyone else, but when her gaze passed my seat in the third row, it just slid right over me like I wasn't even there. I raised my hand at one point. She'd just thrown out a question about balancing equations, and I knew the answer. But instead of calling on me, she picked the kid sitting behind me, like my hand didn't exist. It wasn't subtle either. It was pointed. Near the end of class, she announced we'd be having a quiz Friday on equilibrium equations. A wave of groans echoed around the room. Her quizzes were infamous. No matter how well you understood the material, if you didn't solve things exactly her way, you could kiss those points goodbye. I forced myself to keep my head down and take notes like my life depended on it. Every step of her examples, every specific notation, every little arrow and variable placement she preferred. My pencil flew across the page, matching her board word for word. If she wanted things her way, then fine. I'd give her nothing to mark down this time. After school, the computer lab was practically empty when I settled into my usual corner. I was knee-deep in building the slide deck for my upcoming pitch to Vikram, fine-tuning a graph about user acquisition channels, when a voice broke through my focus. Hey, is this your app? I looked up to see Tiana King from Yearbook Committee leaning on the edge of the table. She told me she'd been using my tutoring app to get through calculus. Said her tutor actually explained things in a way that made sense, unlike her teacher who basically just dumped formulas on the board and left them to drown. When I asked if she'd be down to give feedback on some features I was testing, she didn't even hesitate. Absolutely, she said. We exchanged contacts, and just like that, I had a real user excited to help me build something better. Moments like that reminded me why I'd started this whole thing in the first place. It wasn't about the numbers, it was about making something that actually helped people. That night, I set up my laptop camera and hit record. Watching myself pitch to Vikram was painful at first. My voice shook, my hands fidgeted. I kept sounding like some kid pretending to be a CEO, but I kept going, take after take, explaining user growth, matching algorithm success rates, retention stats, monthly revenue projections. By the fourth run, something clicked. My voice settled. I stopped overthinking and just talked about what I'd built. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was auditioning. I felt like I was owning it. The next evening, my room became my boardroom. Laptop on the desk. Hoodie swapped for a button-down. Vikram appeared on the screen, just as intense as Mr. Castillo had warned. No warm-up small talk. He dove straight in. What's your CAC per channel? What's your CLV calculation based on? What happens to your margins if you switch from freelancers to FTEs? It was like every answer triggered 3 more questions. He pushed on competitive threats, on why anyone would pay for my platform when free ones existed, on what made my algorithm more than just a fancy sorting hat. But I didn't fold. An hour later, he leaned back and finally said, the core product is strong. Timing's good. I want to introduce you to a couple of people who might want in. When the call ended, I sat there staring at my reflection in the black screen, exhausted, but also seen. Vikram hadn't treated me like a kid playing business. He treated me like a founder. Friday came, quiz day. I walked into class with my head high and my pencil sharpened like a weapon. I followed every single step she'd shown us on the board earlier in the week. Labeled the ICE tables. Wrote out the equilibrium expressions exactly how she liked. I could have solved those problems twice as fast my way. But this wasn't about efficiency. This was about strategy. I finished early, checked and rechecked every line for formatting, then handed it in. Walking out of the room, I felt cautiously hopeful. Not certain, never certain with her, but hopeful. During lunch, I cracked open my laptop at the cafeteria table and started drafting an email to Joyce Hendris, the administrator. My tone was calm, professional, focused. I attached scans of 3 previous tests where my answers were right, but marked down because I hadn't solved them her way. I circled her comments, highlighted the correct solutions. Before sending, I added Mr. Castillo to the CC line as a witness to everything that had happened. I hovered over the send button for a long, shaky minute. Then click. 2 hours later, Joyce replied. Fast. She wanted to meet Monday after school, with Mrs. Duran present. No fluff in the email, just action. I forwarded the message to Mr. Castillo with a quick, thank you. Minutes later, he texted back. Asterisk proud of you for doing this right. I'll be there if you want backup. Asterisk. Saturday was nothing but meticulous prep. I built a clean, bulletproof comparison document. Side by side, my method versus the textbook method. Same answers, different paths, neat annotations. No wiggle room for excuses. Sunday evening, Mr. Castillo and I met at a small coffee shop near school. We role-played the meeting, him asking tough questions, me practicing how to stay calm, professional, and focused on policy, not personal attacks. He reminded me, administrators don't respond to emotional appeals. They respond to things that can help all students. That stuck with me. Late Sunday night, as I was winding down, an email from Vikram popped up. He wanted full financials. Server costs by provider. Payment processing broken down to the cent, marketing costs separated by channel. Developer expenses itemized by project. That's when reality smacked me. My bookkeeping was, let's just say, chaotic. I'd been tracking revenue religiously because who wouldn't? Watching it climb was addictive. But my expenses? Scattered across multiple accounts, cards, invoices. I spent hours digging through statements, piecing everything together into a real P&L sheet. And the truth stung a little. $40,000 in monthly revenue looked shiny. But after $12,000 for servers, $8,000 for devs, $6,000 for marketing, $3,000 for fees, and random expenses, the real profit hovered around $11,000. Still amazing for a 17-year-old. Sure, but less superhero than I'd let myself believe. I sent the spreadsheet to Vikram at 2 a.m., then crashed into bed like a rock. Monday morning came fast. Too fast. 3 hours of sleep had turned me into a zombie. I almost face-planted in first period English, jerking awake when the teacher called my name. My brain was split between investor spreadsheets and school politics. Something had to give. At lunch, I made the call. I typed up an email asking Vikram to move our follow-up from Monday to Wednesday night. I explained I had a school meeting I needed to prepare for properly and didn't want to have to either thing. His reply came within minutes. Asterisk Wednesday works. And honestly, it's good to see you balancing your priorities. Founders who burn out trying to do everything end up making bad calls. Asterisk. I sat there reading that line twice. Maybe prioritizing school wasn't a weakness. Maybe it was exactly the kind of maturity investors respected. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't just reacting to everything around me. I was steering it. Monday at 3:30, I walked into Joyce Hendricks's office with a knot in my stomach and sweat sticking to the back of my neck. Mrs. Duran was already sitting there in one of the chairs, her posture stiff and prim like she was preparing for a courtroom battle. Joyce sat behind her desk, calm and professional, and Mr. Castillo slipped in right after me, taking the seat beside mine with a reassuring nod. Joyce started the meeting by thanking everyone for coming, then laid out the agenda. Talk through the grading concerns I'd raised, find a fair resolution. That's when Mrs. Duran pounced. She launched into a long speech about how her rubric was essential for preparing students for the AP exam, how the College Board expected standard notation and structured solutions. She insisted she was just holding us to the expectations we'd face in the real exam. I waited. I let her finish. Then I calmly reached into my folder, pulled out my comparison packet, and laid it on the desk like evidence. One by one, I walked through 3 specific examples where I'd gotten the right answer exactly right, yet still lost points because I'd used my own method. The math was correct. The logic was solid. I just solved the problems differently. Joyce leaned forward, asking pointed questions. Is there a single mandated method for solving these problems on the AP exam? Or does it just require correct reasoning? Mrs. Duran hesitated, then admitted the test didn't actually require a specific method. But she argued that weaker students needed consistency and she couldn't make exceptions for one person without confusing the rest of the class. The conversation dragged on for nearly an hour. Me staying calm, documenting every point, and her growing more defensive, arms crossed tighter each time Joyce pressed her. Finally, Joyce raised her hand. Here's what we'll do. A compromise. She laid it out clearly. Step 1. An oral exam where I'd explain my problem-solving process out loud and answer questions to prove I understood the concepts. Step 2. A timed written test done exactly in Mrs. Duran's format, down to the last label and notation. Step 3. A lab practical where I demonstrate the concepts hands-on, analyzing real results. If I passed all 3, my grade would be recalculated to reflect actual understanding, not whether I colored inside her lines. It wasn't easy. It meant more work than just retaking a test. But it was fair. Mrs. Duran forced a tight smile and agreed, though the look in her eyes made it clear she wasn't thrilled. Mr. Castillo gave me a quick nod as we left the office. By Tuesday morning, the rumor mill had kicked into overdrive. Hallway whispers followed me everywhere. I'd gone from that kid who got called a failure to either the genius entrepreneur or the scammer. Someone showed me a post on the school's anonymous gossip app claiming I'd paid someone else to build my tutoring platform and was just taking the credit. That one hit hard. I'd spent hundreds of late nights writing those lines of code myself, debugging until my brain felt like static, teaching myself frameworks through YouTube and trial and error. Hearing people say it wasn't mine stung more than I wanted to admit. Tiana found me between 3rd and 4th period, reading my face like a book. She told me she'd already posted a comment defending me, explaining she used my platform and knew it was legit. Other students had backed her up too, but we both knew how rumors worked. Drama spread fast. Truth, not so much. Later that night, around 7, my phone buzzed with a DM from Tiana. She said she and her friends would be happy to publicly vouch for my app if I wanted to fight the rumors head-on. I appreciated it more than I could say, but I asked her not to get involved publicly just yet. The last thing I wanted was for Mrs. Duran, or anyone else, to retaliate against students for defending me. She sent a thumbs-up emoji and told me the offer stood. Wednesday evening, I sat at my desk, laptop open, P&L spreadsheet glowing on one screen and my user dashboard on the other. When Vikram's face appeared on the video call, he wasted zero time with small talk. "Share your screen," he said. The grilling began immediately. He wanted to know how I recognized revenue, cash basis or accrual. I had no idea what accrual even meant. He explained why it mattered, why I couldn't just count cash the moment it hit my account if I wanted accurate projections. Then he tore through my expenses line by line. Why were my marketing costs so high when word of mouth was clearly my strongest driver? How much did my server costs work out to per user? What exactly were my freelance devs building, and could I justify what I paid them? Then came the retention questions, monthly cohorts, user activity at 1, 3, and 6 months, conversion rates, churn, channel performance. I scrambled to pull numbers from multiple tabs like a magician digging through the wrong hat. Every vague answer I gave, he met with, "That's not data, that's a guess. Show me the numbers or track them." By the end of the 2-hour call, my brain felt like it had been steamrolled, but I had pages of notes. Vikram wasn't just picking me apart, he was showing me what serious investors look for. "Your fundamentals are good," he said finally, "but your data is a mess. Clean it up, and you'll be ready for real funding conversations." Thursday morning, I opened my inbox and saw the subject line that made my stomach lurch. Privacy compliance concerns regarding student application. The email was from a district IT staffer named Foster McPherson. He said they'd become aware of my app and needed to review it for FERPA and COPPA compliance because it involved students under 18 and was accessible on the school network. In plain English, if they blocked my site, I'd lose nearly half my users overnight. Study hall usage alone was a huge traffic source. And if the district flagged my app as a privacy risk, even unfairly, it would tank my credibility with parents too. I shot back a reply during lunch asking to meet as soon as possible and requesting their compliance requirements. Foster responded within an hour. Meeting set for next Wednesday. He also attached a 30-page PDF on FERPA and COPPA regulations. I spent my free period trying to read it. Half the words felt like legal spells I needed a lawyer to decode. That night, just when I thought my stress levels had maxed out, my phone started buzzing non-stop. Support tickets. The app was down. I pulled up my monitoring dashboard and felt my pulse spike. Response times were through the roof. Error logs were lighting up. A sudden flood of traffic, probably from some viral post I hadn't even seen yet, had slammed into my servers all at once. Everything was on fire. For the next 2 hours, I lived in panic mode. Restarting frozen application servers. Scaling up the database. Upgrading to a bigger instance. Adding more memory. Watching the costs climb by the minute. By 1 a.m., the platform was back online. I sent out a status update to users, apologizing for the outage. But staring at the new server bill, an extra $400 a month, I realized this couldn't keep running like a hobby project anymore. I needed proper infrastructure, load testing, real monitoring, automatic scaling. If something like this happened again during midterms or finals, the damage wouldn't just be financial, it would destroy trust. I slumped back in my chair, the room silent except for the faint hum of my laptop fans. It hit me that this wasn't some teenage side hustle anymore. This was a real company, and I was running it while still trying to survive high school. When I jolted awake at 3 o'clock in the morning, I was still slumped over my desk. My cheek was pressed against the keyboard, leaving little square imprints across my face. The half-empty energy drink on my left was warm, and the spreadsheet on my laptop screen was still glowing faintly. By Friday after school, I dragged myself into the chemistry lab for my usual cleanup duty, and found Mr. Castillo already there, sorting through beakers like he'd been waiting for me. "Thought we'd run a little mock trial," he said with a grin. "You're the witness. I'm the toughest examiner you've ever faced." For the next hour, he drilled me. He'd read a random equilibrium problem from the textbook, and I had to solve it out loud, explaining my reasoning every step of the way. And just when I started feeling confident, he'd cut in with questions. "Why that method? How would you explain this to someone who doesn't think like you? What happens if they can't follow your shortcut?" First, I bristled. I'd spent so long defending my methods that I kept trying to prove my way was better. But he kept pressing, calm, relentless. Slowly, I stopped arguing and started teaching. I explained one problem using my shortcut, then walked back and showed the standard, step-by-step method most students used. And that's when it clicked. The oral assessment wasn't about proving my way was superior. It was about proving I understood the chemistry well enough to explain it from multiple angles. By the end of the session, my shoulders were less tense, and Mr. Castillo gave me this firm, approving look. "Remember," he said, "if she tries to rattle you Monday, stay patient. You're not there to fight. You're there to show her what you know." That Monday in AP Chemistry, Mrs. Duran announced lab partners for a reaction rate experiment. Afterward, as everyone started to clean their own stations, she suddenly raised her voice. Some students have left their work areas messy, she declared dramatically. She walked around inspecting each table like a detective looking for suspects. Then she stopped, of course, at mine. I cleaned everything spotless. But she smirked and announced, since some students like to question authority, they can show their commitment by cleaning up extra. Every head turned toward me. A couple of kids snickered. My ears burned, but I forced a nod and said nothing. 20 minutes later, I was scrubbing down stations that weren't mine while Mrs. Duran sat at her desk, grading papers and watching like a warden. That's when Mr. Castillo passed by with his cleaning cart. He stopped for a moment, met my eyes, and shook his head slightly. He didn't say a word, but that look was enough. I wasn't crazy. What she was doing wasn't fair. Tuesday after school, the real test began, part 1 of my demonstration assessment. Joyce Hendricks was sitting in the back with a notepad, her face unreadable. Mrs. Duran had 5 equilibrium problems neatly lined up on the whiteboard, ranging from baby steps to nightmare mode. Begin, she said. I started with the first problem, classic equilibrium concentrations. I walked through the standard ICE table method, labeling everything meticulously. Then I showed how you could solve the same problem using a system of equations. Mrs. Duran interrupted almost immediately. Why did you write the equilibrium expression like that? Is that standard notation? It matches the textbook, I answered evenly. But I can format it differently if needed. She kept firing questions, significant figures, terminology, every little detail. Joyce took notes silently, occasionally asking her own clarifying questions like, how did you learn this alternative method? And, when would this be more useful than the standard one? By the 4th problem, a beast of a multi-step equilibrium, I could tell Joyce was convinced I understood the material. When she asked how I'd explain it to another struggling student, I laid it out step by step, slower, simpler, clearer. The 5th problem was brutal. It involved temperature shifts, and I had to dig deep into everything I'd studied. I explained it first with Le Chatelier's principle, then again mathematically using the Van 't Hoff equation. By the end of the hour, I was exhausted but steady. I'd done what I came to do. Joyce thanked me and said she'd review her notes with administration. Mrs. Duran kept her lips tight, but the look in her eyes told me she couldn't deny that I knew my stuff. Wednesday afternoon, I walked into the district IT office downtown to meet with Foster McPherson. The place looked exactly like how I imagined an IT office would. Monitors stacked everywhere, cables snaking across the floor, binders piled high on every surface. But Foster himself wasn't the stiff bureaucrat I'd been dreading. He was chill, professional but kind. He explained everything clearly. Because my app served minors and ran partly through the school network, the district was legally responsible for ensuring it followed privacy laws. FERPA covered educational records. COPPA required parental consent for kids under 13. Since some of my users were as young as 14, I had to get parental consent for any data I collected. I also needed a clear privacy policy written in normal language, data encryption for sensitive information, and documented security practices. If you want to keep operating on school networks, Foster said, you'll need to get this right. But I'm not here to shut you down. I actually like what you're doing. We just have to make sure it's safe for students. He handed me a printed checklist. White heavy checkmark parental consent system for minors. White heavy checkmark plain language privacy policy. White heavy checkmark encryption and secure data handling. White heavy checkmark documented security protocols. White heavy checkmark possible external audit. 30 days, he added. Meet these requirements and you're good. I thanked him genuinely. Walking out of that office, my head was spinning. It wasn't just school politics anymore. I was suddenly playing in a much bigger arena, privacy regulations, security compliance, legal frameworks. But at least now I wasn't walking in blind. And Foster didn't treat me like some reckless kid. He treated me like someone building something real. Thursday evening, I finally met Vikram face-to-face at a quiet coffee shop downtown. The kind tucked between glass office towers where startup founders seem to multiply like mushrooms after rain. He wasn't at all what I pictured. Instead of some suit-wearing investor with slick hair and a cold stare, he looked normal. Late 30s, dark hair, worn sneakers, a faded t-shirt under a casual jacket. His laptop was covered in a mess of old startup stickers, half peeling at the edges. He ordered a plain black coffee, sat down across from me at a corner table, and for the next 2 hours, completely dissected my brain. Do you want to build a company? He asked. Or is this just a side project until college? I opened my mouth to answer, but he kept going. What happens when one of the big players copies your idea? What's your moat? Your defense? What makes this yours? The questions came one after another. Retention, scalability, market saturation. He asked what would happen to students after they graduated or switched schools. Would they stay? Or would they drift away, making my app just another high school fad? Then came the one that knocked the wind out of me. What happens to your users if you sell? I stared at him, caught off guard. He leaned back in his chair, coffee cup cradled in his hands, and waited. I'd spent weeks thinking about the acquisition offers, about the money, the freedom, but I'd never once pictured what happened to the 3,000 kids relying on my platform every single week. If I sold, would a bigger company keep the app alive? Or would they absorb it, shut it down, and toss my users into some corporate ecosystem like they didn't matter? Vikram told me about a founder he'd worked with years ago. That guy had turned down a huge buyout because he couldn't stomach the thought of abandoning the community he'd built. The company later became 10 times more valuable. That's the difference, Vikram said softly. Some people chase a payout. Others build something that lasts. By the end of the night, it wasn't the financial questions that stuck with me. It was the weight of responsibility. I realized how little I'd thought about the ethics of what I was building, and who depended on it. Before we left, Vikram told me he was still interested in investing. But not just in my numbers. He wanted to see a real vision. Something bigger than cash flow charts. Friday evening, Tiana texted me asking if I could meet her at the library. She'd invited a few students who used my app regularly, so I could get their input on the new parental consent system I needed to build to comply with Foster's requirements. I showed up at 6 o'clock, laptop under my arm, and found Tiana sitting at a study table with 3 other familiar faces from school. She introduced them quickly: calculus kid, biology nerd, debate team girl. Real users. I showed them my early mock-up. Parents would receive an email explaining what data I collected, then click a link to approve their kid's account. Simple, right? Wrong. One girl laughed and said, "My parents don't even check their email. This would just sit there forever." Another pointed out her parents didn't speak English well. They'd be lost trying to read the legal-sounding text I'd written. A third groaned and said, "If I had to drag my parents into this, I probably wouldn't even bother signing up." The honesty stung, but I needed it. We brainstormed together. Text-based consent, since parents respond to phones faster than emails. Plain language, no legal jargon. Optional in-person consent at school for parents who wanted to ask questions face-to-face. By the end of the hour, my notebook was full of their blunt but brilliant ideas. One girl mentioned her parents would actually feel safer if they got a clear message about privacy and security. Tiana walked out with me afterward, smiling. "I like that you actually listened," she said. Monday during passing period, Mrs. Duran cornered me outside her classroom. Her lips were thin, her voice sharp. "You need to report to the AP Bio lab after school," she said. "You'll be cleaning up after their dissection. Consider it punishment for your attitude." "What attitude?" I started, but she cut me off like a slammed door. A few students nearby had slowed to listen. My chest went tight with embarrassment. That's when Mr. Castillo appeared around the corner with his cleaning cart. He stopped right beside us, posture calm but voice firm. "Cross-department punitive labor isn't covered under policy," he said evenly. "And given the ongoing grade remediation process, that could be seen as retaliation." The color drained slightly from her face. "I'm just trying to teach him responsibility," she snapped. "That's fine," he replied. "Then it needs to happen in your class, not in someone else's. And if you have concerns, you should document them and bring them to administration, not invent punishments." The hallway went silent. Students stared. Mrs. Duran glanced between us, muttered something about thinking it over, and marched back into her classroom. I exhaled slowly. Mr. Castillo gave me a small, quiet nod before rolling his cart down the hall. Grateful didn't even begin to cover what I felt. But the look Mrs. Duran shot me as she left said one thing loud and clear. This wasn't over. Tuesday afternoon, a new email landed in my inbox. Rachel Chin. She ran a local education blog and wanted to interview me about the high school student building the future of tutoring. My stomach twisted. Public attention could be huge, or it could pour gasoline on the fire, especially with Mrs. Duran. I forwarded the email to Vikram for advice. His reply came within an hour. "Hold off. Resolve compliance. Stabilize your situation at school. Press too early could backfire." He was right. I wrote Rachel a polite thank you and said I needed to focus on school for now. Wednesday morning, I was on my way to first period when Joyce Hendricks caught me in the hallway. She told me, very casually, that another AP chemistry teacher would be observing Mrs. Duran's class soon as part of a routine peer review. Her face was completely neutral, but the timing wasn't an accident. A strange mix of emotions hit me all at once. Relief that someone was finally going to see what was happening, and guilt that it had gotten to this point at all. I never set out to make this a big administrative thing. I just wanted to be graded fairly. I thanked Joyce quietly and walked to class, the weight of everything pressing on me. Mrs. Duran had made it clear she wasn't going down quietly. But now, for the first time, she wasn't the only one watching me. Someone was watching her, too. Over the weekend, I pushed the biggest update my app had ever seen, the new parental consent flow. Saturday morning, I hit deploy, then sat at my desk, watching the analytics dashboard like it was a live surgery feed. First, everything looked normal. Then the numbers started dropping. Users who would have breezed through sign-up before were now hitting the parental consent screen and bouncing. I watched my conversion rate slide down like a slow-motion car crash. By Sunday night, it was down by 30%. I did the math. That was roughly $12,000 in monthly recurring revenue gone. My chest tightened with each refresh of the dashboard. I knew I was doing the right thing. Foster's deadline for compliance was real. If I ignored it, I'd lose school network access and bleed out 40% of my users anyway. But watching the short-term hit was brutal. I forced myself to close the laptop. Long game, long game. I repeated the words in my head like a mantra, even though part of me wanted to throw something at the wall. Monday morning, I woke up to an email that made my heart skip. Idute Solutions was offering $1.2 million to acquire my app outright. The number was bigger than any offer I'd seen. For a few minutes, I just sat there, staring at the email. 1.2 million. I could pay off college before I even set foot on campus. No more compliance headaches. No more late nights with error logs. It was tempting, dangerously tempting. But instead of answering, I forwarded the email to Vikram. That night, he called me while I was half buried in homework. His voice was calm but firm. "This is a lowball," he said. "You're growing too fast for that number. Once you stabilize compliance, your valuation's going to jump. 6 months and you'll have better options. Or we raise a small angel round. But don't take the easy money now." I leaned back in my chair, feeling the tension unclench in my chest. For the first time that day, I wasn't thinking about cashing out. I was thinking about what came next. Tuesday afternoon, I walked into Mrs. Duran's classroom for round 2 of the assessment gauntlet, the written test in her exact, rigid format. Joyce was already there with her notebook open like an impartial judge. Mrs. Duran handed me the packet and set a timer for 45 minutes. I forced myself to write exactly how she taught. No shortcuts, no clever algebraic leaps, no personal style. Every label, every step, every fraction in the format she demanded. The problems were child's play. The real test wasn't knowledge, it was discipline. I finished with 20 minutes to spare, but I spent the rest of the time combing through my work line by line, triple-checking for any tiny excuse she might seize on. When the timer beeped, I handed it in with steady hands. For once, I felt confident she wouldn't be able to twist anything against me. Wednesday after school, Joyce called me into her office. She was matter-of-fact but encouraging. She proposed an extra step. Annotate all my old failed tests to show how my methods aligned with the standard ones. If I could document that retroactive understanding, she could formally adjust those grades. It meant nights of extra work on top of running a growing business. But it was a path to fixing my GPA and my future. I agreed without hesitation. The next few evenings, the library became my war zone. My old chemistry tests were spread across the table like crime scene evidence. I spent hours writing detailed notes in the margins, explaining each step of my thought process and mapping it to the textbook approach Mrs. Duran demanded. It was tedious. It was frustrating. At times, I felt anger simmering in my chest, knowing I was proving something I'd already done right the first time. But by Friday, my stack of annotated papers was growing, and my chemistry grade was finally within reach of redemption. Thursday night, disaster hit again. I was halfway through dinner when my phone started buzzing like an alarm. Notifications. Lots of them. I opened my support inbox and felt my stomach drop. A billing bug had double-charged dozens of users. Within minutes, I was at my laptop, refunding transactions manually, typing apology emails one by one. I pulled Tiana in to help me draft a public statement for the app status page. We stayed up crafting something honest. No corporate sugarcoating, just the truth. I'd messed up, and I was fixing it. Cost me about $3,000 in refunds, but the damage could have been so much worse. Transparency saved my reputation that night. Friday morning, another email waited for me. Foster. The district legal team had reviewed everything, and they weren't fully satisfied yet. They wanted an external security audit before approving continued access on the school network. He attached a recommendation. I clicked the link and saw the quote. $8,500. I just sat there for a minute, staring at the number like it might shrink if I looked long enough. I didn't have $8,500 lying around. Most of my revenue was already spoken for: servers, freelance devs, marketing. This was more than a speed bump. It was a wall. That evening, Vikram called. His voice was warm but serious. He offered to cover the audit through a convertible note, essentially a loan that would convert into equity if I raised a proper funding round later. He explained the terms carefully. Founder-friendly, reasonable interest, minimal loss of control. But it was still my first real step into legal, binding obligations. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with my parents, explaining words they'd never had to think about before. Convertible note, equity, angel round. They asked sharp questions. What if I couldn't pay it back? How much of the company would I be giving up later? We talked for an hour, and at the end, we all agreed. A company without compliance would eventually be no company at all. I called Vikram back. "I'll take the deal," I said. The road ahead was getting harder, steeper, but clearer. This wasn't just a side hustle anymore. This was me building something real. Saturday morning, I walked into a sleek glass building downtown with my heart pounding like I was about to take the biggest exam of my life. Vikram met me at the elevator, coffee in hand, looking calm as ever. His lawyer's office was quiet. Just the soft sound of papers being shuffled and the faint hum of the air conditioning. The lawyer sat me down and walked me through every single clause of the convertible note. I tried to look composed, but my pulse was hammering in my ears. Founder obligations, conversion terms, interest rates, equity implications. All words I'd only seen on startup blogs before. Now they were mine. When I finally signed my name on the dotted line, my hands trembled just a little. It wasn't just a signature. It was me stepping out of high school side hustle territory and straight into real founder with legal responsibilities. The $8,500 hit my business account that afternoon. I didn't waste a second. I booked the external security audit for Thursday. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the reality slowly settling over me. A month ago, I was being called a failure in chemistry class. Now I had an investor, legal paperwork, and an app that was forcing me to grow up faster than I'd ever planned. Monday morning in AP Chemistry, Mrs. Duran handed back the timed written tests. When she dropped mine on my desk, she didn't say a single word. I flipped it over. A big, red 100%. No deductions. Not a single nitpick. I felt the corners of my mouth lift before I could stop myself. Her jaw tightened just enough for me to catch it. She moved on to the next student like it was nothing, but we both knew it wasn't. At lunch, Mr. Castillo found me in the hallway. I showed him the paper, and his face broke into a grin. "Good," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Now she knows." Wednesday afternoon, Joyce called me to her office. She had that calm, professional look she always wore when something serious was about to happen. She explained she'd spoken to Mrs. Duran after the assessments. "Mrs. Duran is still personally skeptical of your methods," Joyce said carefully. "But she has no basis to keep failing you. Your grade will be recalculated based on demonstrated competency. The Fs will be replaced with appropriate marks." I nodded slowly. I wanted to feel triumphant, but mostly I just felt relieved. Months of frustration and anxiety wouldn't be erased, but my GPA would be saved. Thursday, the security audit began. The auditors came in like a tactical team, calm, focused, thorough. They wanted to see everything: database architecture, encryption protocols, access logs, pen testing results, password hashing methods. If I'd ever cut a corner, they would have found it. They didn't just test my system. They broke it, poked it, stressed it until weaknesses shook loose like loose bricks in a wall. I learned more in 2 hours of their questioning than I had in weeks of solo research. "You've done an impressive job for one person," one of them said, scrolling through his screen. "But if you want to handle student data at scale, you need enterprise-grade security." It wasn't an insult. It was a wake-up call. I spent the entire weekend at my desk rewriting code, patching vulnerabilities, and restructuring my database like my life depended on it. Sleep was a luxury I didn't have. Sunday night, their preliminary report hit my inbox. Concerns addressed. Audit passed. I stared at the line for a long time. Then I let out a shaky, half-crazed laugh. It was finally over. Monday morning, Foster emailed me. The district would maintain network access for my app. At lunch, I told Tiana and the others. She screamed loud enough to make half the cafeteria look over. "You actually pulled it off," she said, laughing. "You beat the system." Later that week, Mrs. Duran announced to the class that the district had officially approved my app for continued access. She didn't say my name, but every head in the room turned toward me anyway. Her tone was neutral, almost clinical, but I caught the flicker in her eyes. She hated it. The kid she tried to humiliate in front of the class had just built something so solid the district put its stamp of approval on it. The power dynamic had flipped. Friday after school, I found myself back in the chemistry lab. Not because I had to be there, because I wanted to. The empty room smelled faintly of ethanol and chalk dust. The same smell that used to make my stomach sink. Mr. Castillo walked in and leaned on his mop. "You don't have to do this anymore," he said, watching me wipe down the counters. I nodded but didn't stop. This room was where everything had started: the failed tests, the humiliation, the first conversation that changed everything. He smiled, quiet and proud. "You didn't just prove her wrong. You built something real." As I packed my backpack, I thought about the $1.2 million offer still sitting in my inbox. About the 3,000 students relying on my platform. About the sleepless nights, the audit, the fights, the little victories. For the first time, I didn't feel like a kid being underestimated. I felt like a founder. And Mrs. Duran? She could glare, smirk, or scowl all she wanted. She couldn't take that away from me ever again. Monday morning, my alarm went off at 6 o'clock, and it felt like a semi-truck had parked on my chest. 3 hours of sleep after a weekend of stress, spreadsheets, and caffeine had turned me into something halfway between a human and a zombie. In first period English, I kept nodding off as my teacher passionately analyzed symbolism in some novel I could barely keep my eyes open for. She stopped mid-sentence. "Are you feeling okay?" I mumbled something about a project, and she gave me that teacher look, equal parts concern and suspicion, but mercifully moved on. My brain felt like it was moving through molasses, and sitting there blinking too slowly, I realized something very simple and very terrifying. I was trying to do too much. Running a company, fighting academic battles, keeping up grades, juggling investor meetings, all at once. Something had to give. At lunch, I pulled out my phone and typed a quick email to Vikram. I asked if we could push our call from Monday night to Wednesday, explaining I had a school meeting that afternoon that I needed to focus on. My finger hovered over the send button for half a second before I hit it, bracing myself for an irritated response. Instead, his reply came back in minutes. "Wednesday works, and honestly, this makes me more confident in you. Most founders burn themselves out chasing everything at once. Good judgment matters more than endless grind." Reading those lines, the knot in my chest loosened a little. Maybe protecting my academic standing wasn't weakness, it was strategy. If an investor respected that, then he was probably one worth keeping. That afternoon, at 3:30 sharp, I walked into Joyce Hendrick's office. She was seated behind her desk. Mrs. Duran was already there, arms crossed tightly, sitting like someone preparing for battle. A minute later, Mr. Castillo slipped in quietly and sat beside me. Joyce opened the meeting with her usual calm, explaining that she wanted to address the grading concerns I'd raised and find a fair resolution. Mrs. Duran wasted no time. She launched into a defense of her grading rubric, talking about AP exam expectations, standardized notation, and how strict enforcement was necessary to prepare students for success. I waited for her to finish, then pulled out my documentation. I walked Joyce through 3 clear examples. Problems I'd solved correctly but gotten wrong because I hadn't followed her method step by step. The math was sound. The reasoning was solid. The only crime was thinking differently. Joyce started asking pointed questions. Does the AP exam actually require a single method, or just clear reasoning and a correct solution? Mrs. Duran hesitated, then admitted, the exam doesn't require one method, but she argued students needed consistency, especially weaker ones. For nearly an hour, we went back and forth. Me calm and methodical, Mrs. Duran growing more defensive with every round. Finally, Joyce held up her hand. Here's the compromise, she said. 3 assessments. An oral explanation where I'd walk through problems out loud, showing I could explain my reasoning clearly. A timed written test using Mrs. Duran's exact format, every label, every step, her way. A lab practical demonstrating applied understanding in real time. If I passed all 3, my grade would be recalculated to reflect actual competence, not just compliance with one method. Mrs. Duran agreed, though her eyes made it very clear she hated every syllable of that deal. Mr. Castillo gave me a subtle nod as we left. A silent well done. By Tuesday morning, the rumor mill had already gone nuclear. Hallway whispers followed me like static. Some people called me a genius entrepreneur. Others decided I was a fraud. Someone even showed me a post on the school's anonymous gossip app accusing me of paying someone else to build my tutoring platform. The accusation hit harder than I expected. Every late night, every bug I'd fixed, every line of code I'd painstakingly written, I'd done all of it myself. Tiana found me between 3rd and 4th period. She could see the stress written all over my face. Hey, she said. I already posted on the app. Told them I use your platform and it's legit. A bunch of other students backed me up too. I thanked her. But the truth is, rumors spread faster than facts. Drama was always more interesting than reality. Later that night, at 7 p.m., my phone buzzed with a DM from her. She offered to publicly vouch for me with her full name and story if I needed it. Several of her friends were willing to do the same. I thanked her but told her to hold off. The last thing I wanted was for students defending me to get targeted by angry teachers or dragged into this mess. She sent a thumbs up emoji. Offer stands, she wrote. Wednesday evening, I sat at my desk, laptop glowing in the dark, P&L spreadsheet on one screen, user dashboard on the other. Vikram's face popped up on the call, casual shirt, calm demeanor. But the second we started, it was like stepping into a financial boot camp. He made me share my screen and immediately started tearing through the numbers. How are you recognizing revenue? Cash or accrual? I blinked. Cash. He sighed, not in frustration, but like a teacher watching a promising student make a rookie mistake, and spent 20 minutes explaining accrual accounting and why it mattered if I ever wanted real investors. Then came expenses. Why's your marketing spend this high when word of mouth is doing the heavy lifting? What's your server cost per active user? What are your devs working on, and why are their hourly rates justified? He wanted retention curves, cohort analyses, real numbers on long-term user engagement, not guesses. Every time I tried to give a soft answer, he reminded me why that wasn't good enough. 2 hours later, my head felt like it had been split open by spreadsheets. But my notebook was full 3 dense pages of everything I needed to fix. Your fundamentals are strong, he said finally. But your data's too messy. Get that clean, and you'll be ready for real capital. I thanked him for the call. My brain was fried, but my path forward was clearer than ever. I wasn't just fighting one teacher anymore. I was building something real, and that meant stepping up both in the classroom and in the world beyond it. Thursday morning, I rolled over in bed, grabbed my phone, and saw the subject line that made my stomach clench before I even opened the email. Privacy compliance concerns regarding student application. It was from someone named Foster McPherson in the district IT department. The message was professional, polite even, but I could feel the weight behind every line. The district had learned about my tutoring app, and they had concerns, serious ones. Because my platform served students under 18 and ran partly through the school networks, they needed to review everything. Privacy practices, data handling, compliance. Foster specifically cited FERPA and COPPA regulations, which, up to that point, I had only vaguely heard of. He requested a meeting for the following week to lay out the requirements I'd need to meet to stay approved on school networks. On paper, it was just a review. But in reality, if they blocked my app, I'd lose about 40% of my user base overnight. Study halls, free periods, after-school access gone. Not to mention the unspoken message that a block would send to students and parents. This app isn't safe. Even if it wasn't true, the damage would be immediate. I spent first period staring blankly at the board while my English teacher droned on. My brain wasn't in the room. I was running numbers in my head. 40% of users gone meant a minimum of $15,000 less in monthly revenue. At lunch, I emailed Foster back, letting him know I'd meet any time, any day. He replied an hour later with a Wednesday slot and attached a 30-page PDF full of legal language about FERPA and COPPA. I opened it, tried to make sense of it during free period, and felt my brain immediately short-circuit. Legalese, regulations, clauses, acronyms. It was like reading a foreign language with no translator. That night around 11 o'clock, I was just settling into some late-night coding when my phone started buzzing like a fire alarm. Support tickets. Something was wrong. I jumped onto my monitoring dashboard. Response times were spiking. A few seconds later, the app was down. Completely. A big, ugly timeout error stared back at me. My pulse slammed into overdrive. I dove into the server logs and found the problem immediately. An insane traffic spike. Some viral post must have blown up overnight, flooding the platform with new signups all at once. My current setup couldn't handle that kind of load. I spent the next 2 hours in full crisis mode, restarting frozen application servers, upgrading database capacity, allocating more memory on the fly, watching the costs tick upward with every step. By 1 a.m., the system was stable again. I posted a quick apology on the status page, explaining it was just a temporary outage from unexpected traffic. But staring at the new server bill, I felt the weight of reality settle on my shoulders. An extra $400 in monthly expenses. More importantly, a reminder that if I wanted this thing to scale, good enough infrastructure wasn't going to cut it anymore. I needed proper monitoring, automatic scaling, load testing, real prep work, not band-aid fixes at midnight. I scribbled a list of infrastructure upgrades in my notebook, then let my head drop onto the desk. When I came to, it was 3 a.m. My face was stuck to the keyboard, the faint outline of keys pressed into my cheek. Friday after school, I dragged myself into the chemistry lab for cleanup duty. Mr. Castillo was already there, tidying the counters. When he saw me, he smirked. "Good timing," he said, holding up a thick chemistry textbook like it was a weapon. "Oral assessments coming up. Let's make sure you're ready to face the dragon." For the next hour, he became the toughest examiner I'd ever met. He'd read an equilibrium problem out loud. I'd start solving it step by step, explaining my reasoning. Then he'd interrupt. "Why this method? How would you explain it to someone who doesn't think like you? What if the shortcut isn't clear to them?" At first, I got defensive, snapping back explanations like I was in a debate, not a lesson. But he wouldn't let up. He made me slow down, walk through the problems both ways. My quick, efficient shortcuts and the longer, more traditional format Mrs. Duran preferred. Felt slow, painfully tedious. But somewhere in the middle of problem 4, something shifted. I finally understood. The oral assessment wasn't about proving my way was better. It was about showing I could adapt. That I understood the material well enough to teach it to someone else, no matter how their brain worked. By the end of the session, I was tired but steady. Mr. Castillo leaned against the lab counter, mop in hand, and gave me that look. The quiet kind of encouragement that didn't need words. "Stay patient," he said. "She's going to poke and prod. Don't take the bait. Just show her you know your stuff." For the first time all week, despite the compliance nightmare, the late-night crash, and the exhaustion, I actually felt ready. Monday's AP chemistry lab was supposed to be routine. But of course, Mrs. Duran found a way to turn it into a performance. We had just finished our experiment on reaction rates when she started making a big theatrical show of inspecting the lab stations. She paced slowly between tables, calling out any stray beaker or dripped liquid like it was a crime scene. When she reached mine, she stopped. Even though my area was spotless, she tilted her head like a judge delivering a verdict. "I expect more effort from students who question authority," she said loudly enough for the whole class to hear. "You'll stay after to clean not just your station, but also the others that weren't properly maintained." The room went silent. A few students smirked. Others just looked away. My cheeks burned, but I bit the inside of my cheek and nodded. Fighting her here, in front of everyone, would only give her more satisfaction. When the bell rang, everyone else filed out, laughing and chatting, while I stayed behind gathering beakers, wiping up other people's messes, and scrubbing tables I hadn't even touched. Mrs. Duran sat at her desk pretending to grade papers, but I could feel her eyes flicking up every so often to make sure I was still working. About 20 minutes in, Mr. Castillo passed the open door with his cleaning cart. He slowed down when he saw me wiping down stations like a janitor on punishment detail. He didn't say a word, but the look on his face said plenty. His brow furrowed, his jaw tightened, then he shook his head, just slightly before moving on. That tiny gesture, a silent "I see what's happening here," was enough to make the humiliation sting a little less. Tuesday afternoon, I walked into Mrs. Duran's classroom for the first part of my demonstration assessment. Joyce Hendricks was already there, sitting quietly near the back with a notepad. The whiteboard was covered with 5 equilibrium problems, each more complicated than the last. Mrs. Duran crossed her arms. "You'll solve these out loud," she said. "Standard method and any alternate approaches you think are appropriate. Show us what you know." I took a deep breath and began with the first problem, a straightforward equilibrium concentration calculation. I walked through the standard IC table method step by step, labeling everything the way she liked it. Then I showed how to reach the same result using algebraic substitution. She jumped on me immediately. Why did you write the equilibrium expression like that? That's not standard notation. I kept my voice calm. It's what the textbook uses, but I can adjust it. She fired off more questions, significant figures, terminology, notational differences. I answered each one carefully, like defusing a bomb. Joyce occasionally leaned forward, asking neutral, clarifying questions, especially about how I'd learned the alternative methods. The second and third problems went the same way. Me explaining, her nitpicking, Joyce taking steady notes. By the fourth problem, a multi-step equilibrium, I noticed something shift. Joyce was nodding slightly as I walked through my reasoning. She could tell I wasn't just winging it. I knew this material. She asked me how I'd explain the concept to a struggling student, and I laid it out step by step, breaking it into smaller pieces, relating it to what students already knew, offering both algebraic and conceptual reasoning. The fifth problem was brutal temperature effects on equilibrium. I showed both the conceptual explanation with Le Chatelier's principle and the more mathematical derivation with the Van T. Hoff equation. Took everything I had to stay composed, but I nailed it. By the end of the session, Joyce thanked me for my time and said she'd review her notes. Mrs. Duran didn't say much, just tightened her lips in that way that told me she hated not having something to tear apart. Wednesday afternoon, I walked into Foster McPherson's office downtown for the district IT meeting. His office looked exactly like you'd expect an IT office to look. Walls lined with routers, old computer towers stacked like bricks, binders stuffed with policies. But Foster himself? Not the villain I'd built up in my head. He was straightforward and surprisingly kind. Look, I'm not here to shut you down, he said. But if your platform's being used on district networks, I have to make sure it meets federal privacy laws. Then he walked me through the list. FERPA, which protects student education records. COPPA, which requires parental consent for collecting data from anyone under 13. The need for explicit parental consent for under 18 users. A clear, plain language privacy policy. Data encryption. Regular security updates. Documentation of data handling practices. Possibly an external security audit. It was a lot, but he didn't talk down to me. He gave me a 30-day deadline and made it clear the door wasn't closed, as long as I took compliance seriously. I like seeing students innovate, he said, but innovation and responsibility have to grow together. I left his office with my head spinning, a list of requirements longer than a chemistry formula sheet, and a new kind of pressure pressing on my chest. But there was also relief. Foster wasn't my enemy. He was giving me a shot to step up. I intended to take it. Thursday evening, the coffee shop downtown smelled like roasted beans and quiet ambition. The kind of place where people in hoodies pitched million-dollar ideas between sips of espresso. That's where I met Vikram in person for the first time. He was younger than I expected. Late 30s maybe, with dark hair, jeans, and a plain t-shirt under a worn jacket. No suit. No polished corporate vibe. Just a beat-up laptop plastered with startup stickers and the calm confidence of someone who'd sat on both sides of the table before. He ordered a black coffee and we grabbed a corner table. What followed was 2 straight hours of him dissecting everything about my app like a surgeon with a scalpel. Is this a company? He asked early on. Or just something you're doing until college? He pushed me on everything. My competitive landscape, defensibility, retention strategy, and what would happen if a big edtech company released a similar feature. Then, an hour in, he hit me with the question that threw me off balance. What happens to your users if you sell? I froze for a second. I thought about acquisition offers purely in dollar signs, not people. Not the 3,000 students who open my app every week to get through homework and exams. Vikram leaned forward, voice low and firm. This is what separates people who build something lasting from people who just take the first check, he said. He told me a story about a founder he'd backed years ago who turned down a big offer because he felt a responsibility to his users. That company ended up being worth far more later. I left that coffee shop realizing something I hadn't before. This wasn't just about scaling or surviving school. I needed to figure out what kind of founder I actually wanted to be. Friday evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Tiana. Library, 6 p.m.? Gotta fix this parental consent thing. I showed up to find her sitting at a study table with 3 other students I recognized, all active users. They'd volunteered to give me blunt, honest feedback about the consent system I needed to build to satisfy the district. I opened my laptop and showed them my mock-up. A simple email-based system where parents would get a message, read the privacy info, and click approve. The feedback came fast and brutal. My parents barely check email, one girl said flatly. My dad doesn't speak English that well, another added. This looks complicated, a third said. Half the people I know just won't bother. They weren't wrong. Then the brainstorming started. Make the consent flow mobile-friendly so parents could respond via text. Write the privacy policy in plain language, not tech or legal jargon. Offer an in-person consent option for parents who preferred face-to-face explanations. One student mentioned her parents would actually feel better knowing the app went through a formal review. Clicked then. Compliance didn't have to be just a roadblock. Could build trust. By the time we wrapped up, I had pages of notes. As Tiana and I walked out together, she grinned. You're not just building an app, she said. You're building something that matters to people. Monday, between second and third period, Mrs. Duran ambushed me in the hallway outside her classroom. I need you to report to the AP Bio lab after school, she said coolly. You'll be cleaning up after their dissection lab. Consider it extra responsibility. I blinked. For what? She didn't even let me finish. Attitude problems, she snapped, loud enough for students nearby to turn and listen. Heat crawled up my neck. Before I could speak again, a familiar voice cut through the tension. Mr. Castillo appeared from around the corner, pushing his cleaning cart. He'd heard everything. He stopped beside me, posture calm but firm. That's not in school policy, he said evenly. Cross-departmental punishment isn't allowed, especially when there's an active grade remediation process in place. Mrs. Duran's smug expression faltered. I'm just trying to teach him responsibility, she said. Then it should happen in your own classroom, Mr. Castillo replied, or through proper administrative channels, not personal assignments. The hallway had gone quiet. Students were openly watching now. She hesitated, then muttered something about thinking about it, and retreated into her classroom. But as she passed me, she gave me a look sharp enough to cut glass. Promise, she wasn't done. Mr. Castillo gave me a small nod, subtle, but enough to say, I've got your back, and rolled his cart down the hallway. I stood there in the silence, heart pounding, grateful for him, but also bracing myself, because Mrs. Duran wasn't the type to walk away from a grudge. Tuesday afternoon, I opened my inbox to find an email with the subject line, Interview Request, Student Entrepreneur Story. It was from Rachel Chen, who ran a local education blog. Apparently, word had gotten out about a high school student running a tutoring platform that was actually taking off, and she wanted to feature me. For a second, I just stared at the screen. The idea of an interview made my pulse speed up. Part excitement, part dread. It felt good to be noticed, but publicity also sounded like gasoline on a fire I hadn't even finished putting out yet. I didn't know if more attention would help me, or make Mrs. Duran double down. I forwarded the email to Vikram with a quick message. Thoughts? His reply came back in under an hour. Hold off. No press until compliance and school stuff is stable. Press can complicate things fast. He was right. The last thing I needed was Mrs. Duran thinking I was trying to make her look bad publicly. I wrote Rachel a polite response thanking her for the offer, but explaining I needed to focus on school for now. She replied almost immediately, saying the offer would still be open whenever I was ready. Wednesday morning, Joyce stopped me in the hallway before first period. I've arranged for another AP chemistry teacher to sit in on Mrs. Duran's class, she said. Her face was calm, unreadable, but the timing said everything. I felt my stomach twist. On one hand, I was relieved someone else would finally see how Mrs. Duran operated. On the other, I felt a knot of guilt I didn't ask for. I hadn't set out to get her under scrutiny. I just wanted fair grading. Now this was becoming bigger than me. I thanked Joyce and headed to class, already imagining how Mrs. Duran would react when she found out. That weekend, I pushed the updated parental consent flow live on the app. Saturday morning, I sat at my desk watching the analytics dashboard like a hawk. Within hours, the sign-up numbers started dipping. By Sunday night, the trend was unmistakable. A 30% drop in new user conversions. I did the math. $12,000 in monthly recurring revenue gone. I refreshed the dashboard again and again, like maybe the numbers would change if I stared hard enough. But they didn't. I knew it was the right call. Comply now or risk losing everything later. If the district blocked my app, I'd lose way more than 30%. But watching that revenue slip through my fingers in real time hurt. It wasn't just money. It was momentum. I shut my laptop and forced myself to focus on the long game. This was survival, not surrender. Monday morning, I opened my email and froze. Adute Solutions, a name I recognized from earlier conversations, had sent a formal offer. $1.2 million to buy the app outright. For a long moment, I just stared at the number. That kind of money would wipe away every problem I had. Compliance headaches, server costs, sleepless nights, and the daily stress of juggling a startup with school. But I didn't click reply. I forwarded it straight to Vikram. He called that evening. Don't sell, he said immediately. Not now. Not for that number. If you handle compliance and growth right, you'll be worth a lot more in 6 months. And if you need cash, we can explore an angel round without giving away control. It wasn't what I wanted to hear in the moment, but it was exactly what I needed to hear. For the first time, I felt like I was making decisions like a real founder, not just a kid looking for the easy way out. Tuesday afternoon, I walked into Mrs. Duran's classroom for the second part of my assessment. Joyce was there again, notebook in hand, expression steady. Mrs. Duran handed me the test packet and set a timer. 45 minutes. I forced myself to follow her exact format, down to the tiniest label and arrow. Every redundant step, every unnecessary line of work. All of it. The problems themselves weren't hard. The hard part was suppressing the urge to solve them my way. I finished early but spent the rest of the time combing through every detail. If she tried to mark me down this time, she'd have to invent a reason. When the timer went off, I turned in my test and walked out with something I hadn't felt in months. Quiet, solid confidence. Wednesday after school, Joyce called me to her office. She explained that she wanted one more step added to the remediation process, going back through all my old failed tests and annotating them to connect my methods to the standard textbook format. It was more work, a lot more, but it also gave me a way to formally repair my GPA. I agreed. That week, every evening, I sat in the library surrounded by a sea of red-marked tests. I wrote page after page of annotations, explaining how each of my solutions aligned with standard methods. Sometimes it made me furious. I was proving in painstaking detail that I'd been right all along, just not in her language. But anger didn't change the fact that this work was my ticket to undoing months of damage. So I kept going. By Friday night, my hand ached, my brain was mush, and my homework was a disaster. But my chemistry grade? For the first time, it felt like I was actually taking control of the outcome. Thursday afternoon, I was halfway through dinner when my phone started vibrating like it was trying to escape the table. Notification after notification. I opened my inbox and felt my stomach sink. Angry subject lines, refund requests, duplicate charges. Somehow, a billing bug in the app had double-charged a chunk of my subscribers for their monthly payment. My pulse shot up as I scrolled through message after message. People frustrated, some even threatening chargebacks if I didn't fix it fast. I spent the entire evening glued to my laptop, manually refunding every single affected account and writing personal apology emails like my life depended on it. Around 9 p.m., I finally texted Tiana. Hey, I need help writing something clear and honest for the status page. 15 minutes later, she was sitting next to me at my desk, hair tied back, no nonsense look on her face. We worked together to draft a transparent message. What happened, how I was fixing it, and how I'd make sure it wouldn't happen again. What could have been a public disaster became something else, a trust moment. I lost about $3,000 that night in refunds, but it was worth it. The users saw I owned up to my mistakes and took them seriously. Friday morning, just as I was starting to breathe again, another email landed in my inbox, this time from Foster McPherson. The district's legal counsel had reviewed my updated privacy policy and parental consent system. It wasn't a rejection, but it wasn't a green light either. They were requiring an external security audit before allowing continued network access. Foster attached a recommended firm that specialized in edtech compliance. I clicked the link, scrolled down, and felt my chest tighten. $8,500. I didn't have that kind of cash just lying around. Most of my revenue was already tied up in server costs and paying freelance devs. I could try debt or I could give up equity, but either way it meant stepping into a different level of business. That evening my phone rang. Hey, Vikram said when I picked up. I've been thinking about your situation. He offered to fund the security audit himself through a convertible note, a short-term loan that would turn into equity later if I ever raised an actual funding round. He explained the terms slowly and clearly, like someone who'd done this 100 times. Founder-friendly, reasonable interest rate, no hidden traps. But it also meant this wasn't just my side project anymore. It would be real, legally, financially, contractually real. I need to talk to my parents first, I said. That night we sat around the kitchen table, me, Mom, and Dad. As I explained what a convertible note was, they asked good, honest questions. What happens if you can't pay it back? How much control would he get? It took an hour, but we reached the same conclusion. Keeping the app in schools was more important than holding on to 100% ownership of something that could be shut out overnight. I called Vikram back and said yes. Saturday morning, I logged into the security firm's scheduling portal. The earliest available slot was Thursday, less than a week. I opened a blank document and started making a list of everything they'd requested. System architecture diagrams, data flowcharts, the server configuration details, privacy policy documentation, authentication protocols. The list grew fast, and the truth hit me like a cold wave. I'd been keeping so much of this information in my head, not on paper. If I wanted to play in the big leagues, winging it wasn't an option anymore. I spent 6 straight hours documenting every part of my database structure. Table names, fields, relationships, what data I stored, how it flowed, where it went. By the end of the night, I had a 20-page document that actually looked like something a real company would hand over to auditors. Sunday was worse. I tackled security measures, password encryption, payment data handling, log retention. The auditors also wanted an incident response plan, something I didn't even have. So I built one from scratch. What I'd do if there was a breach, how I'd notify users, how fast I'd respond. When I finally sent the documentation package Sunday night, I was so tired I didn't even remember walking to bed. Monday morning at school, I opened my inbox and froze. Subject, formal complaint review. It was from Joyce. I didn't need to open it to know who filed the complaint. Mrs. Duran. Her written statement painted me as disrespectful and insubordinate. She accused me of refusing assigned cleanup duties and claimed Mr. Castillo had interfered with her classroom management. She twisted everything that happened in the hallway into something that made me look like a problem student. I sat through my morning classes with my jaw clenched, barely hearing a word of the lessons. At my free period, I went to Joyce's office. She explained the process in her calm, measured voice. A formal inquiry, witness interviews, documentation. Could take 2 weeks. I could feel the heat rising in my chest. The mix of frustration and exhaustion that had been simmering for weeks. But Joyce's steady demeanor kept me grounded. I found Mr. Castillo after. When I told him, he just shook his head. I figured she'd pull something like this, he said. But you've been documenting everything. That matters. Let the process do what it's supposed to. At lunch, I opened my phone, pulled up my notes, and started typing out my statement. Dates, times, exact words. Every interaction with Mrs. Duran I'd logged since this mess started. She wanted to play this game formally. Fine. I was ready to play it with receipts. Tuesday at lunch, I just sat there in the cafeteria pushing a fork through soggy fries and seriously considered nuking AP Chem for my schedule. My head felt like a pressure cooker, compliance deadlines, investor calls, formal complaints, grade remediation, actual homework. Every part of my life was barking orders at once. Maybe the sane move was to drop to regular chemistry and reclaim a sliver of bandwidth. It's not like colleges deny you for saving your own sanity, right? I pulled up the course change form on my phone and started filling in the boxes. By the time I wandered into the chem lab after lunch to think in peace, the form was half done. That's where Mr. Castillo found me, hunched over a lab stool like it was a lifeboat. "What are you doing?" he asked, already reading my face. I showed him the form. He didn't flinch, just sat down on the neighboring stool and leveled me with that steady, kind stare. "Dropping now," he said quietly. "Will feel like proving her right. You've already done the hard work. Filed through the proper channels, stood your ground, completed her assessments, documented everything. If you quit before the results land, you throw all of that away." He tapped the edge of the phone. "And applications? Colleges will see the mid-year drop and wonder why. You're smart enough for the material, we both know it. The only question left is whether you'll see it through." That sank in deeper than I wanted to admit. I closed the form without submitting it and told him I'd stay. He smiled small, certain. "I knew you would." Wednesday afternoon, I walked into the student ethics panel hearing feeling like I should have worn a suit or at least a thicker skin. 5 students and 2 teachers sat behind a long table in the library conference room. Folders open, pens poised. The chair cleared her throat and said they'd been reviewing whether my tutoring app crossed the line into academic dishonesty or gave users an unfair advantage. They wanted to hear it from me. I said what I always believed. The platform is basically tutoring what rich families have always had, just made affordable and accessible. "This isn't buying answers," I said. "It's buying explanations." A student panelist leaned forward. "So how do you stop people from cheating, uploading homework, sharing test keys?" I opened my laptop and walked them through the guardrails. Tutors can't see a student's actual assignment file. They work from prompts and concepts. Sessions are instructional, recorded, and reviewable. If a teacher flags a user, I can pull logs. The system is built for teaching, not for shortcuts. Another student asked about peer tutors. "How do you know they're qualified?" I explained the matching algorithm, pairing by learning style, subject competency signals, performance history, and the rating system that surfaces strong tutors. Students can see tutor ratings and feedback before booking. Underperformers don't stick. The marketplace kicks them out. A teacher on the panel folded her hands. "And you're profiting from this?" "Yes," I said. "But it's still far cheaper than private centers, and I pay the peer tutors. Servers, payment processing, security, it all costs money. I'm not running a homework black market. I'm running a tutoring service." The questions kept coming for an hour: edge cases, safeguards, cancellations, moderation, how I handle reports. When it ended, I felt wrung out but clear. I said everything I needed to say. Whether they heard it the way I meant it, that was out of my hands. Thursday morning, the auditors arrived. 2 people with quiet voices, steel trap eyes, and laptops bristling with security tools. They spent the entire day inside my system like professional burglars hired to test your locks. Between classes, my phone kept lighting up. Access requests, test payloads, notes about auth flows. After school, I logged in and opened their preliminary findings and winced. Nothing catastrophic, but the kind of stuff that keeps you up at night if you know what you're doing. Logging too thin to reconstruct certain events, strong password hashing, but they wanted additional salting, several API endpoints missing proper rate limits, hello dose risk, session management that needed to be tighter. So Thursday evening turned into a sprint. I added detailed audit logs, who accessed what, when, and through which path. I put rate limiting on every public-facing endpoint and tuned thresholds. I hardened session, token generation, and rotation. Friday after school, I kept going. They'd recommended moving encryption keys out of code and into a key management service, so I migrated 3 straight hours of reading docs, testing rotations, and rewiring secrets like I was defusing something live. By Friday night, every item on their list was checked off with a concrete fix. I sent them an email summarizing each change, the rationale, and pointers to the new docs. Their reply came back fast. Impressed with the turnaround, final report would reflect the improvements. "We've seen full teams take weeks to do this." I leaned back in my chair, hands still shaking, and let that sink in. 2 days earlier, I was ready to drop AP Chemistry. 48 hours later, I defended my company to an ethics panel and upgraded my platform security footprint like a real engineering team. And as for the formal complaint and the district's decision, those were still ahead of me, waiting like 2 locked doors at the end of the hallway. Saturday morning, I sat in the lobby of Vikram's lawyer's office downtown, palms damp, heart thudding like I was about to sign away my soul instead of a business deal. The lawyer led me into a small glass-walled conference room and slid the paperwork across the table. She went through every clause line by line, interest rates, conversion terms, what would happen in a future funding round. I nodded along, trying to act like this was normal, like 17-year-old signed convertible notes every day. When I finally picked up the pen and signed my name, something in my chest twisted. Pride and fear, tangled so tightly I couldn't tell which was stronger. That afternoon, the $8,500 hit my business account. Within the hour, I booked the external security audit for the following Thursday. Later that night, lying in the dark, staring at the ceiling, it really sank in. A few weeks ago, I was a kid failing chemistry. Now I was someone with legal obligations, an investor, and a company to protect. Monday morning in AP Chem, Mrs. Duran passed back our timed written tests. When she placed mine face down on the desk, I flipped it over expecting some red scribble somewhere. But at the top, in bold red marker, was 100%. No deductions. No snarky comments. Just a perfect score. She didn't say a word, just moved on to the next student. But I caught the way her jaw tightened when she saw the grin I couldn't hold back. At lunch, Mr. Castillo caught up with me near the vending machines. I held up the test without a word. He clapped me on the shoulder with a proud little smile. Good, he said. Now she knows. By Wednesday, Joyce called me into her office. She told me she'd spoken with Mrs. Duran, who was still personally skeptical of my approach, but she admitted she no longer had a legitimate reason to keep failing me. Joyce explained that my previous failing grades would be recalculated to reflect demonstrated competency. It didn't erase the months of stress, but it meant my GPA wouldn't go up in flames over a battle I'd already proven I could win. Thursday morning, the auditors arrived. 2 people, laptops, poker faces. They dug through everything: data storage, encryption protocols, password hashing, access logs. They ran penetration tests that hit corners of my system I didn't even know existed. One of them looked genuinely impressed and said, "For one person, this is solid. But if you want to scale, you're going to need enterprise-level security." It wasn't an insult. It was a wake-up call. I spent the weekend buried in code, patching vulnerabilities, tightening access controls, restructuring parts of my database. I barely slept, surviving on cold pizza and energy drinks. Sunday night, they sent me their preliminary report. Everything had been addressed. Monday morning, Foster emailed me with the words I'd been waiting for. "The district will maintain access to your app." I leaned back in my chair and laughed. A sharp, breathless laugh that felt like weeks of pressure finally cracking open. At lunch, I found Tiana and the others who'd helped me brainstorm the consent flow. When I told them, Tiana screamed so loud the entire table turned. "You actually pulled it off," she shouted, grinning like she'd built the app herself. Later that week, Mrs. Duran announced to the class that the district had approved my app for continued network access. She didn't say my name, but every single head turned toward me. Her voice was neutral, but I could see it in her eyes. She hated saying those words out loud. The power dynamic had shifted, and she knew it. Friday after school, I stayed behind in the lab, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I wiped down the counters the way I used to when I thought I was just the kid stuck cleaning up after everyone else. Mr. Castillo leaned on his mop handle at the door. "You don't have to do this anymore," he said. I smiled and kept wiping. This lab was where everything started, where I'd first shown him the prototype. "Proud of you, kid," he said quietly. "You didn't just prove her wrong. You built something real." As I zipped up my backpack, I thought about the $1.2 million offer still sitting in my inbox. The users, the long nights, the future that was suddenly so much bigger than this school. For the first time, I didn't feel like a student fighting to survive a class. I felt like a founder. And Mrs. Duran? She could never take that away again.
Thanks for watching. Today's train wreck is over, but tomorrow's ride is already on track. Subscribe so you don't miss it.